A shift toward monkhood. We arrived at the temple and I noticed how clean and inviting everything appeared. My mind began to shift toward monkhood. I went up to the pavilion along with the rest of my party. At first, I just wanted to see the girl who was there to make merit, punya, that day. But after seeing the monks and novices, samanera, in the pavilion, sitting there composed and still, I started to feel full of admiration and faith, sattha. I observed an elder monk who was perfectly composed. He sat there unmoving. I observed him the entire time, and he sat composed, just like a wax statue. The other monks and samaneras were also sufficiently collected and composed. I started to reflect on the past, back to when I was ordained. That was like merely covering a plank of wood with orange-colored robes. These monks of the Thammayut order were what I wanted to become. I had wasted so much time doing worldly things after I had disrobed. Now that I had found a Thammayut temple, I would definitely become a monk in this order. I was going to make the most of my life as a human by ordaining and leaving this world in ochre robes. Although I had gone to the temple with the intention of scoping out the girl, that was just a dream. I hadn't even seen what she looked like. That day, I reviewed my intent to disrobe from the Mahanikaya order in order to ordain in the Thammayut order. Now that I had found a Thammayut temple, I was determined to ordain and spend the rest of my life as a monk. Whatever good or evil would befall me, I would remain in ochre robes until my dying day. After thinking about ordaining for some time, one matter concerned me. I told myself that if I had already become a monk and was curious about worldly matters, I would lack the information to dispel the curiosity. Of course, I was thinking in a worldly manner, siding with myself. But no matter. The Buddha also passed through the world, and I was going to follow his example. Thereafter, I rearranged my plans in order to be able to dispel curiosity in worldly matters. I told myself that the world was just an intermediate pathway. I vowed not to die in commoner's clothes. Ultimately, I was bested by my own defilements, kilesa. Although I lost, I didn't lose myself. I constantly used wisdom, paññā, to teach myself that I will not get stuck in this world forever. I made a promise, saccā, to myself, man to man. During that time, I didn't know what mental cultivation, bhavana, meant at all. I had read manuals and knew the term mental cultivation practice, bhavana patipati, but was clueless as to the actual methods. So when I came to live with my wife's family, I found it difficult to adapt to my new lifestyle. I had never had a partner before. I had to figure out how to make the necessary mental adjustments. On the day of a full moon, Uposatha, Luang Por Bunma told me, "Thoon, come and visit me at the temple tonight." I agreed and arrived at the arranged time. When I reached his hut, kuti, around 6 p.m., he was doing walking meditation, jankama. Upon seeing me, he walked into his kuti and I followed him. We hadn't spoken at all when he reclined and asked me to give him a massage. I had no idea what I was doing, so I simply squeezed along his legs. He told me, "That is enough," and sat up. Then he asked me, "Do you want to hear a sermon?" I responded, "I do, sir." He told me, "Listen carefully now. Arise, cease. Arise, cease." Then he asked me, "Do you understand?" "I do, sir," I told him. He continued the sermon. Arise, cease. Arise, cease. All right, go home now. After hearing the short sermon, Arise, cease, I experienced great mental bliss. My mind was so replete and happy, it was difficult to put into words. It was as if something had compelled me to feel the Dhamma. It was as if I had understood and realized the great depth of how all things arise, cease. I paid my respects and headed home. Once I came down from the kuti, it felt as if a great clarity of wisdom had arisen within me, and I understood the truth that everything in this world arises and ceases. Whether that thing is occupied by consciousness, vijnana, or not occupied by consciousness, it will arise, persist momentarily, and cease. Although I only lived 1 kilometer from the temple, It took me many hours to get home, as I spent much time in wisdom contemplation of arise, cease. I stood at times and walked at times. What were the things that arise and cease in this world? I understood the entire scope of it through wisdom. I knew and saw what caused things to arise and what caused things to cease. I knew and understood it all. It was odd to me that I could have such a detailed and comprehensive understanding of the subject matter without previously having ever thought about it. The more I probed into arise, cease, the wider my knowledge and realization expanded. The knowledge and realization were very clear. I saw that naturally occurring things and human-constructed things are all subject to arise and cease. Even our bodies that have already arisen must cease as well. When I got home, I lay down and thought in a continuous manner about how everything arises and ceases. This entire world is comprised of things that arise and cease. Some arise slowly and cease slowly. Some arise quickly and cease quickly. Some arise slowly and cease quickly. Some arise quickly and cease slowly. How slowly things arise or how quickly things arise, or how slowly things cease or how quickly things cease, is contingent on their relative nature, just like humans and all types of animals, dhirachana. Even beings born on the same day will die at different times. Nothing that arises at the same time will cease at precisely the same time. Everything has its own set of causes and factors. As I was contemplating arise, cease, it felt as if my own life wouldn't last for much longer before it too would cease. I told myself that since I knew that I would also cease, why should I waste my time with worldly happiness? While I still have time, I must make haste to cultivate good deeds. The opportunity only lasts as long as the breaths do. Whenever the time for my last breath comes, the opportunity to cultivate goodness will cease immediately. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I spent all night thinking about arise, cease, with great delight. When I awoke the next morning, I continued to think about arise, cease, continually. The more I thought about it, the greater my understanding of arise and cease became. I knew that I had come to a true understanding and realization of arise and cease. It was correct and clear. It was authentic wisdom of the right view according to the truth of the world. The following day, I heard practitioners of mental cultivation, bhavana patipati, discussing the calmness of the mind, citta, the symptoms of the citta, and the characteristics of physical and mental bliss. When I asked them about meditation, samadhi, they all answered the same way. Concentrate on the meditative mantra, parikama, putto. Breathe in and think put, and breathe out and think to. Train your steadfastly focused awareness, sati, only on put, to. Do not allow the mind to wander to external subjects and forbid all thought. I wasn't sure if what they were saying was accurate. I went to ask Luang Por Thoon about it so that I could understand. Is what they said about how to meditate correct? He told me, what they said about meditation is correct. Then he gave me a couple other tips on meditation. The instant I got home, I sat down and meditated. I achieved results during my first attempt at meditation that night. The citta was calm and focused. Both my body and mind were in a state of bliss. Thereafter, I meditated every day. The citta would converge into an unwavering state of serenity every time, and it reached that state quickly too. However, my wisdom-based personality was still deeply entrenched in my mind. After I meditated and the citta attained a state of steadfastly focused concentration, samadhi, I would want to contemplate. So I picked the familiar topic of arise, cease to contemplate and fused it with my focused concentration. During that period, Luang Por Thoon had never taught me how to develop continuous insight, vipassana. I didn't know the methods of developing continuous insight either. I thought it odd that when the citta had briefly achieved steadfastly focused awareness through meditation, I would always pull up the topic of arise, cease to contemplate. The more I thought about arise, cease, the more my mind clearly understood the depths of its application. I was able to form comprehensive clarity and eradicate doubts related to that which I used to be attached. My progress solidified my faith, sattha, in my method of practice, my faith in the Buddha, my faith in the Dhamma, and my faith in the Arya Sangha. I was certain that my practice was correctly aligned with the path and fruit of enlightenment. Magga Phala Nibbāna. The next day, I told Luang Por Thoon about my technique and results. He firmly reassured me. That's right. Keep doing this often, and the citta will come to release its attachments on its own. Then he told me, be diligent in your contemplations. Think of everything in terms of arise, cease, and apply everything to the three common characteristics, tilakhana, that is, anicca, or impermanence, dukkha, or mental and physical suffering, and contemplate in order to know and see the cause of suffering too, and anatta, or how something has ceased to exist in its original state, and the notion that nothing is animal, person, self, me, or you whatsoever. From that lesson, I accelerated my efforts at contemplating. I knew that there was a lot of work to do each day and that I could not just sit down, train my mind on meditative mantras, and meditate for long stretches. If I were to meditate, it would only be during a break from work. Afterward, I would have to grab an axe or hoe and return to working the fields. While I was working, I would constantly think about arise and cease according to impermanence, suffering, and not self. I contemplated as I worked. My mind enjoyed dwelling in the Dhamma. I constantly sought out various Dhamma examples, ubaya, and used them to teach myself with wisdom in the process. Why am I so infatuated with this world when nothing even belongs to me? Even my body does not truly belong to me. Everything is only here to be relied on momentarily. Soon it will disintegrate. Nothing lasts forever. Even the crops growing in front of me are impermanent, as they are all subject to arise and cease. What material elements, vatu tatu, in this world can truly be mine? None of the material elements in this world are of actual significance or value whatsoever. They are only used to nourish and protect this clump of elements, tatu, and enable our daily survival. The body and mind, tatu kanta, that relies on external elements for survival cannot endure for long. This body and mind, tatu kanta, will cease due to its own causes and factors. If this is true, then why am I so attached to this world? All of these material elements belong to the world. No one can claim ownership. I am also one of the world's sentient beings, relying on and consuming material elements for temporary survival. This is the way of the world, and this is how it will always be into the future, without any end in sight. If I were to be reborn, I would have to find a way to survive in this world, just as before. There would be no end in sight. Therefore, when it comes to Dhamma practice, if you possess strong mindful wisdom, there will be no obstacles to your practice at all. You can practice mental cultivation anywhere you may be. There is no need to carve out a specific time or location. You can even contemplate at work if your mindful wisdom is sharp enough. Whatever you are looking at, simply form an understanding of how that item arises and will cease to exist in a short time. Or use wisdom to contemplate so that you know and see how everything falls under impermanence, suffering, and not self. Once you follow these guidelines for wisdom contemplations, you will be on the correct path. Don't doubt your practice. If your contemplations correspond to the three common characteristics, then your wisdom contemplations are correct, and your practice is correct. I achieved results from this same method, and that's why I want to share it with you all, so that you can apply it to your own practice as well. Don't just sit around and concentrate on meditative mantras or only practice meditation. That being said, don't neglect meditation. When you have free time, take a meditative rest break as appropriate. But for the most part, you must employ wisdom in thinking about arise, cease on a regular basis. All of the examples, ubaya, that you use to reinforce your wisdom must be examples of your own reasoning. If you can do this, you will never be stuck in a corner. You will be able to use this wisdom to fix problems that arise all by yourself. You must train your wisdom to be comprehensively intelligent so that problems will be fixed in time. This is the true meaning of one is one's own refuge. I used my own material possessions as the basis for models, upaya, of wisdom contemplations. This is because material possessions are material elements, wattu tatu, of a rudimentary level. Material possessions are material elements that were created afterward. While your wisdom is at a rudimentary level, you must contemplate rudimentary subjects until you become more seasoned in that mode of thinking and can form comprehensive clarity within your mind. Draw parallels between the external objects and the elements within you, namely the four elements, jatu tatu, of earth, water, wind, and fire. Contemplate so that the impermanence in the internal elements is as evident to you as the impermanence in the external elements. Know and see the characteristics common to all elements, samanya lakkana tatu. Know and see how the internal elements and external elements are subject to the same condition of impermanence. The moment you assume a possession as your own, mental suffering will instantly be tied to that object. Wherever you find yourself, you can channel your wisdom to contemplate self-belongings and the four elements in accordance with the three common characteristics, because these are physical phenomena, rupa dhamma, perceptible to the naked eye. Using these Dhamma models in wisdom contemplations will allow you to understand and realize the truth with your inner eye, with your mind's eye. Once you develop comprehensive wisdom of the truth of reality through this process, your mind will become progressively smarter and more thorough. You won't need others to make decisions for you because you will be fully capable of deciding what is right or wrong. Why would you rely on others to make your decisions? Practitioners tend to ask for approval or answers from others. If the person being asked to decide has consummate knowledge of the subject, they can make the correct decision. However, for the most part, people tend to form conclusions based on their manuals. Their decisions are based on what they believe the answer should be, which can prove utterly incongruous with the practitioner's meaning. Often, they claim to be experts on various Dhamma topics, but sometimes things that occur in actual applied practice, patipati, don't correspond to their knowledge of the manuals. This is because knowledge of the manuals is merely knowledge of Dhamma in name. When face to face with real Dhamma, they won't even realize what it is. This is called knowledge without realization, or realization without knowledge. That is why it's imperative to train in generating both technical knowledge and personal experience at the same time. If you know some Dhamma, you must also see that Dhamma. If you see some Dhamma, you must also know that Dhamma. Then you can genuinely claim to truly know and truly see the Dhamma. If you know something but haven't seen it for yourself, that knowing can be wrong. If you see something but don't know it, that seeing can also be wrong. Thus, for an understanding to be truly right, knowing and seeing must go hand in hand. In Bali, this is called yana tassana, knowing followed by seeing, and tassana yana, seeing followed by knowing. Once your practice corresponds to these guidelines, Bhutto has taken root within you.